Hi everyone, welcome back to Rabbi's Reflection. I'm glad that you're joining with me today. We'll be continuing in our reading of Kitchen Table Wisdom by Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen. Today, we'll be reading the story Professionals Don't Cry. Stay with us as we read through the story and then offer some reflections. One of the most common experiences in the practice of medicine is the experience of loss and disappointment. Physicians typically experience many disappointments every week, from the small nudge of the lab test revealing that a medication is not effective, to the blow of a patient dying. It is a great deal for any caring person to handle, yet most of this loss remains unacknowledged and ungrieved. I teach a course now at our local medical school to the first and second year students. In one of the evening seminars, we explore our attitudes toward loss, uncover some of the beliefs about loss we inherited from our families, identify our habitual strategies for dealing with loss, and examine what we do instead of grieving. This is often a rich and deeply moving experience which allows the students to know themselves and each other in different ways. At the close of one of these evenings, a woman student stood and told me that her class had already been given 2 lectures on grieving by the Department of Psychiatry. I had not known this, and I apologized, saying that it might have been better to choose another topic for the evening's discussion. "Oh no," she said, "it was different. They taught us grief theory and how to recognize when our patients are grieving a loss, and be respectful of that. They just didn't say that we would have anything to grieve." The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. This sort of denial is no small matter. The way we deal with loss shapes our capacity to be present to life more than anything else. The way we protect ourselves from loss may be the way in which we distance ourselves from life. Protecting ourselves from loss rather than grieving and healing our losses is one of the major causes of burnout. Very few of the professionals I have treated for burnout actually came in saying that they were burned out. I don't think most of them knew. The most common thing I've been told is, "There's something wrong with me. I don't care anymore. Terrible things happen in front of me, and I feel nothing." Yet people who really don't care are rarely vulnerable to burnout. Psychopaths don't burn out. There are no burnt-out tyrants or dictators. Only people who do care can get to this place of numbness. We burn out not because we don't care, but because we don't grieve. We burn out because we have allowed our hearts to become so filled with loss that we have no room left to care. The burnout literature talks about the factors which heal burnout: rest, exercise, play, the releasing of unrealistic expectations. In my experience, burnout only really begins to heal when people learn how to grieve. Grieving is a way of self-care, the antidote to professionalism. Health professionals don't cry, unfortunately. The second day of my internship in pediatrics, I went with my senior resident to tell some young parents that the automobile accident from which they had escaped without a scratch had killed their only child. Very new to this doctor thing, when they cried, I had cried with them. After it was over, the senior resident took me aside and told me that I had behaved very unprofessionally. "These people were counting on our strength," he said. I had let them down. I took his criticism very much to heart. By the time I myself was senior resident, I hadn't cried in years. During that year, a 2-year-old baby, left unattended for only a moment, drowned in a bathtub. We fought to bring him back, but after an hour we had to concede defeat. Taking the intern with me, I went to tell these parents that we had not been able to save their child. Overwhelmed, they began to sob. After a time, the father looked at me standing there, strong and silent in my white coat, the shaken intern by my side. "I'm sorry, doctor," he said. I'll get a hold of myself in a minute. I remember this man, his face wet with a father's tears, and I think of his apology with shame. Convinced by then that my grief was a useless, self-indulgent waste of time, I had made myself into the sort of person to whom one could apologize for being in pain. I remember a rotation on the pediatric service of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. During this rotation, we were actually losing a child a day. Every morning we would begin rounds in the autopsy room, talking to the pathologist about the child who died the day before or who was lost during the night, and every morning I would leave the autopsy room and go back to the children's ward telling myself, well, on to the next. This attitude, which was so prevalent in my training, also happened to be the approach to loss I had learned in my family. The afternoon my 10-week-old kitten was run over, my mother took me to a pet store and bought me another. I was taught at a very early age that if something painful happened, the best thing to do was not to think about it and to get involved with something else. Unfortunately, in medicine, the something else I got involved with was often another tragedy. The bottom line is that grieving is not meant to be of help to any particular patient. You grieve because it's of help to you. It enables you to go forward after loss. It heals you so that you are able to love again. On to the next is a denial of a common humanity, an assertion that someone can die in front of us without touching us. It is a rejection of wholeness, of a human connection that is fundamental. It makes no sense at all when you say it out loud. Oof. What a powerful story and a powerful message from Dr. Remen this week. I think there are certain weeks that hit a little bit closer to home than others, and perhaps you're with me and join with me in that this week was quite powerful. She's really trying to convey something that's really so important to us as humans, as individuals, as caretakers, as perhaps some of us medical professionals, for others being within a medical facility, and what we're just kind of aware of or see on a day-to-day basis. So in a certain sense, this story is meant for doctors. It's meant for any healthcare professional, not just a doctor, but that's Dr. Remen's specific vocation. And on another level, I think this is really something that can be learned from or meant to be addressed to anyone. We all come into contact with loss and disappointment on a constant basis. So it's very easy to understand that from a medical or healthcare perspective. Obviously, there's the death of someone, which is very sad and tragic, but constant loss and disappointment at such smaller levels, perhaps an inability to achieve some type of physical benchmark that someone was hoping for before, or perhaps the effectiveness of a certain drug or medicine. And I think it's important, especially in this context when we're sharing together here in our times of reflection, that that's true for the medical staff side, as well as, let's imagine, for the individual as well. So both people, both sides are experiencing loss and disappointment. And what Dr. Remen is trying to teach us and to try to draw us towards is this sense of grieving, and how grieving is necessary in order to process and encounter the loss. If we don't grieve, if we simply just bottle it up, shove it aside, ignore it, we're not going to be able to function. And she says it so poignantly, and I think it needs to be repeated over and over again. How we deal with loss shapes our capacity to be present. How we deal with the challenges in our life, how we deal with difficult moments, how we deal with conflict, how we deal with sadness is going to shape the way that we're present in the rest of our lives. I think so often we say, or so often we feel, let's not talk about it, it's too sad. Let's not bring this up because it's going to make someone else sad. I don't want to think about sad things because it's just going to bring me down. But what I think she's reminding us and telling us that's something so deeply true I'll say for me, and in agreement with Dr. Remen, is that we need to deal with them in some way. We need to talk about them. We need to confront and encounter loss and grieving. And so often, we'll notice whether we are recipients of that care or whether we're giving the care, that we burn out, that we're present, that we're aware of burnout around us. People not treating us with dignity or respect, snapping back at us, saying something unkind, only to realize later, I shouldn't have said that. Feelings of stress and anxiety and worry. I know I'm not alone in that. And so often the antidote to these feelings, what people would call burnout, is a need to have more rest, perhaps more exercise, a time to play, to be more creative. Perhaps a need, as Dr. Remen also says, to release certain expectations that you have for the way that things work. But what Dr. Remen is trying to point out here is while those are all important, perhaps what's most important is the need for grieving, the need to make time to mourn the losses that we have. She poignantly talks about in the beginning of her training that she, at one moment, would cry with an individual who was crying. She had told them the sad news that someone in their family had died, and she cried along with them, and she was rebuked for that. But it was something internal that she knew that felt like the intuitive response to give, and yet that is not what our culture does. We do not pride someone for showing their vulnerability, but rather the way that her senior kind of manager, the doctor that she was, the senior resident that she was being trained by said, they're looking to you to be strong. In the face of sadness, you need to not show your emotion. And sadly, I think that's not the way to go. We can cry with other people who are crying. We can show our emotion and our care. Right? So tellingly, in that second story, the individual who's experienced that loss, the terrible loss of a child, says to the doctor, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for the display of grief and sadness that I'm showing. I'm going to get a hold of myself. Just give me a moment. Because we don't give space for people to actually mourn and to actually feel sadness. And that is something also that we're taught, not just by our culture or society, but by our families, by our own selves. When we grow up, we're probably often not told it's okay to cry. It's okay to talk about suffering and loss. Okay, so that's our lesson, that's our reflection for today, is to honor the moments in our lives that we've lost, and that we can grieve. And we can remember what we've lost, and we can come together, whether as individuals or as a community, to recognize those moments. Not because, or not simply, or not to think falsely that somehow remembering and coming together is going to bring us down, but it's actually in some ways going to lift us up. That being able to come together or being able to just reflect and grieve on what we've lost will actually end up allowing us to be more present and stronger with one another. Okay. Have a great day, everyone.